Hello, my name is Lucy, and welcome to the Great Battles of History podcast. To get PDF versions of episodes or to suggest a battle, please visit greatbattlespodcast.weebly.com. Today, I will talk about the Battle of Cannae. You most likely have heard of the Roman Empire, and maybe you have heard of Hannibal the Great and Terrible. This episode covers how an outnumbered Hannibal broke the unbreakable Roman legions. I would like to note that there are slightly different theories of what happened, as is normal with ancient history, so please don't be emailing me just because you heard it a different way. Our story starts on the fertile island of Sicily, coveted by Greeks and Carthaginians alike. The Carthaginians were, obviously, the inhabitants of Carthage, a strong and wealthy city-state. However, Romans referred to the people of Carthage as Punic, because the people of Carthage were of Phoenician descent, and the Latin word for Phoenician is Punicus. The Carthaginians were more focused on economics than warfare, but they had an army. The situation on the island was already tense, and now the rising power of Rome wanted Sicily too. Wars were fought over land in Sicily, including the wars between Rome and Carthage called the Punic Wars. Rome had secured the city of Syracuse and intended to push back the Carthaginian sphere of influence. Then, quote, gather the Greek settlements in central Sicily into their security umbrella. Quote from The Rise of Rome by Anthony Everett. As you can guess, the Carthaginians were not happy about this. I can't possibly cover everything that happened in the wars for Sicily, and besides, I thought this episode was supposed to be about the Battle of Cannae. So basically, a man named Hamilcar Barca led the Carthaginian armies in the First Punic War. Fun fact, Barca was not a family name, it was a nickname meaning lightning or sword flash, related to the Hebrew word barak. I think that's how you pronounce it. Hamilcar had 3 sons and 1 daughter, and one of those sons was Hannibal. Hannibal was raised in Spain, and it is said that his father had him swear an oath of hatred toward the Romans when he was a child. When Hannibal was old enough to command troops, he began preparing for an attack on Rome. He had a strong base in Spain, but he knew the Roman army would be prepared for an attack, so he thought up an ingenious plan. He would march his army into Italy through the treacherous Alps. Famously, Hannibal entered the Alps with around 50,000 infantry and 9,000 cavalry. He came out with 20,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. Despite the loss of over half his army, Hannibal's move was a smashing, or rather army-obliterating success. The Romans didn't know what hit them. Now, up to this point, the Roman legions had been unstoppable, simply because they were disciplined and always held the numerical advantage. But they were not at all tactical. They knew only one way to fight, hitting the enemy head-on with a strong line of soldiers. When Hannibal fought his first battles with the Romans, he realized that this was a critical weakness. He was able to lure the Romans into traps by making his army seem vulnerable, and the Roman armies could never resist a chance to attack. This is why I'm so interested in Hannibal, because he used tactics so well, predicting the Romans' moves before battles even started, and accounting for those in order to win. Hannibal did a lot of interesting things, but personally, I think Hannibal's greatest masterpiece was at Cannae. I'd like to note here that you pronounce it Can-E, despite its spelling, C-A-N-N-A-E. Hannibal met the Romans at the town of Cannae with around 40,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry, his army having been reinforced by defectors from nations around Rome. The Romans brought in an army 80,000 strong. This would scare most generals, but Hannibal was prepared. Encyclopedia Britannica explains, quote, his army took control of the Aufidus, now Ophanto, river, the main source of water in the area. That added to the strain on the Romans, who would struggle to satisfy the thirst of their greater number of soldiers in the early August heat. Hannibal positioned his lines facing north, compelling the Romans to face mostly to the south, where the hot Libeccio wind blew dust and grit into their eyes, an irritant and disadvantage that, according to ancient authorities, cannot be ignored. In addition, Hannibal confined the 8 Roman legions in a narrow valley, hemmed in by the river. In one stroke, Hannibal thus restricted the mobility of the Roman cavalry and forced the Roman infantry to adopt a formation that was deeper than it was wide, 2 factors that would prove critical in the outcome of the battle. Unquote. Hannibal thought of everything, and his strategy would pay off. So how exactly did Hannibal deliver such a crushing defeat? I will try my best to describe where the armies were and what happened, but if you want an even better idea of the formations of the armies, I have posted a good video I found documenting the events of Cannae on my website. On the day of the battle, Hannibal lined up his weaker troops, composed of Spaniards and Gauls, in a long line facing the Roman army. Flanking this line were the Carthaginian cavalry and Hannibal's strongest soldiers, the Africans. The Romans decided to pack their army together very tightly and attack the vulnerable center. Like the creamy center of a jelly donut, it looked like it wouldn't hold up against a strong force. When the battle began, the cavalry began fighting, leaving their respective armies. The Romans charged at the Carthaginian center with all their might, but instead of fleeing, the Gauls and Spaniards moved backwards, maintaining their organization. They kept this up until the African troops, who had not moved much from where they had stood at the beginning of the battle, now flanked the Roman army on either side instead of the Carthaginian army. You probably know that an army never wants to be surrounded on three sides, but just as the Romans were starting to realize what happened, it got worse. By this time, the Carthaginian cavalry had routed their Roman counterparts, so they swung back around and completed the encirclement. A Roman army, 80,000 strong, had been trapped by an army half their size. At the time, it was unthinkable. Most of the trapped soldiers were killed, but after Cannae, Rome did something even more unthinkable. Or rather, it was what they didn't do that was so amazing. They didn't give up. They suffered defeat after defeat at the hands of Hannibal, and Cannae was the latest bad news. It would have been easier to surrender, but they didn't. The situation the Romans were in would be like someone punching you in the face. Hard. Over and over and over again. But they didn't give up. They just kept raising new armies until they won. You know, people say that there's a fine line between bravery and stupidity, and the Romans walked on that line like a tightrope over the lava pit that was the Second Punic War. Thanks for listening.